This film is a fictionalized account of events taking place between 2001 and 2029. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. In 2020, a virus named SARS-29 spreads rapidly across the world, disrupting lives, economies, and eventually governments. In its aftermath, the world sinks into a deep and severe economic depression, unparalleled in all of modern history. The worst, however, is yet to come. On April 3rd, 2022, a wave of unexplained deaths hits New York City. Over 300,000 people die in less than 24 hours. Only a week later, on April 10th, the CDC announces a new mutation of the virus named SARS-29. The new virus activates latent SARS-29 infections in the spinal fluid of recovered and previously asymptomatic patients, causing paralysis, strokes, heart attacks, and in the majority of cases, instant death. Over 600 million people die between June and August. A vaccine is developed in December 2022, but is not widely available for another 6 months. By August 2023, SARS-29 has claimed the lives of over 1.5 billion people. The SARS pandemic, however, is far from over. In January 2024, NATO, Russian, and Chinese troops returning home from the Middle East begin dying en masse, despite having received vaccinations to SARS-29. The new virus is identified as SARS-24. In the majority of cases, patients die suddenly after being asymptomatic carriers for several weeks. 2 billion lives are lost to SARS-24 in 2024. The final case of SARS-24 is recorded on October 1st, 2027. The total worldwide death toll from the SARS viruses stands at over 4 billion. The following is a documentary presentation of those that have survived the SARS pandemics. These are their stories, recorded during 2029.
We now travel back to the United States to talk with one of the most influential figures in politics and education today.
I'm Professor Hilfer, Director of Televised Education for the National Educational Foundation. Before that, I was a professor of English literature at Harvard.
You're often known in the media today as the principal. Why is that?
Yes, I've heard that expression. I think it's due to the fact that education has changed and adapted so much over the last 10 years, and I've been at the forefront of its evolution. It's very survival at a time most of us wish had never happened, at a time when most of us lost many we loved.
How have you been at the forefront?
Education.
Well, back in 2022, after our beloved President Trump died of SARS-29 and after a national month of mourning, Vice President Bernie Sanders, if you remember, he took over for Michael Pence when he died of SARS-29 a month before that. And even though we called him Crazy Bernie back then, soon-to-be President Sanders called me up on the phone and he said, "Carol, I need you to help make America's educational system great again."
How did you respond to that?
I said, "Okay, how would you like me to do that?"
What did he say?
He said, "Carol, I'm gonna leave that up to you. What do you suggest?" I told him that I thought we should take over the television airspace and start broadcasting lessons so that every child can receive their lessons on broadcast channels 4 through 14, depending on their grade level. Well, he said that's unacceptable. We need channels 4 through 24 so that college can be free too. I said, great, let's do that.
So that's how televised at-home schooling began.
Yeah, pretty much. The broadcast stations weren't exactly thrilled about having their channel sequestered from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., but they wound up making more money on commercials during those breaks than they ever did during soap operas, I imagine.
That program was considered the most successful educational program in the modern era. Why do you think that is?
The quality of education that we used, and the fact that we had an organized online study and testing component available to every student, and that every kid had to pass in order to get food. And we made learning fun. We made things like chemistry and calculus easy. Basic math was more accessible to the little ones. They didn't find it a chore when they were being taught their lessons from Sesame Street characters. And parents farming at home didn't mind that their kids were glued to educational programming while they tended to their crops and livestock. And at a time when the government didn't have very much money, it saved money as well. A lot of money. And we made sure that only the best educators were responsible for the education of our children nationwide.
You are one of the few people and programs the new government retained after the revolution. Why is that?
Because we've never been politically biased. We've never been about supporting corporations or the wealthy at the expense of those left out of the system, which is what caused the riots and then the revolution. We've always been about education and making sure that our kids receive their lessons, good moral guidance, and that they learn analytical and decision-making skills so that they can decide for themselves what is right. I think when the new Continental Congress initiated direct democracy so the US Constitution could be restored after decades of neglect and abuse, and when they prohibited organizations and individuals from donating to campaigns and ads, and set a new standard for education for those running for office moving forward, President Yang realized that we were part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Education isn't the only thing that has changed. The way we record history is also experiencing a revolution. Our next interview takes us to Charleston, South Carolina to speak with Professor James Sampson. Hi, why did you decide to specialize in the SARS pandemic?
For the same reason Thucydides decided to write about the Peloponnesian Wars in ancient Greece. History was happening. Thucydides knew that what he wrote down would be remembered for all time so long as it was recorded, and that someone needed to create a reliable record of it. Most will not take the trouble to find out the truth, but will just accept the first story they hear. I want to make sure that future generations hear the right story.
And what have you found?
The Iranians didn't release SARS-19 in 2019. The disease really should be called SARS-15 because it was 2015 that they released it.
Tell us about the evidence you found.
For starters, for those old enough to recall the rapprochement with Cuba, when Americans and Cubans restored diplomatic relations, there was a scandal about sonic weapons targeting embassy staff in 2017. Now, the Cubans denied knowing anything about it, and for good reason, because it was the Iranians that were experimenting on new weapons. And in 2020, when they fired a missile at an American base in Iraq, and troops there suffered head injuries, the Americans didn't know it at the time, but the Iranians had launched a chemical weapon that released that toxin on those poor American soldiers.
So, what does the neuroweapon have to do with SARS-19?
Well, that story in particular was just meant to show how the Iranians were going about attacking America. They never attacked directly, only indirectly, using things that no one could prove they were doing. As for SARS, the Iranians had really poor intelligence. I mean, they were awful at intelligence collecting, just like they were bad at designing bioweapons. The Revolutionary Guard wanted to attack anyone who they thought was involved with the CIA. And for whatever reasons, they decided an American novelist, Arthur Schopenhauer, was a Central Intelligence Agency asset and decided to target him.
We now travel to Galena, Illinois to speak with Arthur Schopenhauer, the once famous novelist known online as Patient Zero. Hi, Arthur. There are some circles in the medical and intelligence communities that believe you are Patient Zero, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard targeted and infected you with SARS-19. How does your personal experience line up with that narrative?
Well, back in 2015, I was living just north of New Orleans in this North Shore town called Mandeville. But then there were these two weird men that they would follow me around, like everywhere I went. They were outside my home. They'd park out there, and something was clearly going on.
What did those two men look like?
Just Middle Eastern men. Always smoking, though. I'd see them, I'd look through my window at night. I mean, they'd be there all day, but I'd look at my window at night and see these two men sitting in a parked car, alone, with the embers from their cigarettes glowing in the night, and that was it. And that was every day. That was every day these guys were there. And I figured they were criminals. I figured they were going to do something, but I had no idea that they were Iranian agents.
How did you know you were being followed?
Well, I mean, first off, they followed me everywhere I went. I'd go to the store and they'd be, a couple cars behind, and then they'd be in the parking lot. They followed me everywhere. But what was really eerie is that I would call the police and say that there's a couple guys following me, and they would come to the house, and right before the police car got there, the Iranians would drive away. And then right when the police car left, the Iranian car would come right back. So it's like they knew what I was doing. But I did get a picture of the license plate, and I showed it to the police officer one day. And years later, they told me that the name associated with that driver's license that guy had been arrested. Finally had been arrested and had been uncovered as an Iranian agent. So that's when I found out about that.
A CIA operation in 2022 found evidence that you were infected in 2015 by Iranian agents. What were the first symptoms of SARS-19 that you experienced?
Well, one week I just started feeling off. And each night I'd be short of breath. And then one night I had a stroke. I was watching TV, and all of a sudden I couldn't understand what the person on the TV was saying, and then I tried to say something myself, but I couldn't. It was just gibberish, and I thought, holy shit, I'm dying. I mean, what? Because I'm sitting there watching the TV, and I'm trying to talk, but it's just coming out gibberish.
Why did you not go to a hospital?
I'm more afraid of a hospital bill than death.
How did you recover from SARS?
Oh, no, I never recovered from SARS. I mean, even now I have an itchy throat, and I have to take an inhaler twice a day, otherwise my blood oxygen level is too low. For me, SARS began as a stroke, but I would get random bouts of pneumonia, and in 2018 I had a cough for the entire year. And so that made me think that maybe I'd gotten tuberculosis in 2017. I'd been in China in 2017. I thought maybe that's what this is. But I was concerned, and so I did overcome my fear of hospitals, and I did go to see a doctor, and they did all these tests, and they told me, actually, no, you have SARS.
Why do you think the Iranians targeted you? Do you believe it's because you were famous as the proud owner of a celebrity cat?
Well, I mean, I guess the Iranians are always chanting death to America, right? Maybe they're actually chanting death to American cats. But no, most people think it's because they mistook me for a CIA agent.
And why do you think that they thought you worked for the CIA?
Well, as most of you know, before all the pandemics, I was a pretty famous author, and I had written a book, which a guy named Saeed Sabazian in Iran, he translated that into Farsi in 2004, and that translation was banned by the Iranian government. And so he emailed me, and he was complaining about the situation there with the book being banned. And I emailed him back, and I said, look, dude, you should start a revolution, right? Because I think any country that restricts the freedom of speech of its people, there's got to be change. And obviously the Iranians were monitoring his emails, and so they saw what I said to him, and they took it really seriously, and I think that they thought that I was trying to incite a revolution over there. And so they figured that, I must work for the CIA.
When did you first realize that you might be patient zero?
Back in 2022, I'd been living in a rural area, and these two men in suits showed up and knocked on my door. And I had been recovering from SARS, and they just showed up.
These were different than the two men in Louisiana?
Oh, no, it was totally different. I mean, they weren't sketchy, but honorable looking, They were clearly government officials. And, one of them, I'll never forget, one of them pulls out this badge, and it says Department of Defense. How often does that happen? But so I knew that they were on the level.
And what did these men say to you?
They asked me all these questions about my case, my symptoms, and my cat. If my cat had symptoms, they asked about the Middle Eastern men that had followed me around. And then a helicopter flies down and lands, and these men in hazmat suits come, and they take my blood, and then they take my cat. Took my cat? Okay. And then they loaded up into the helicopter, and they flew away.
Did they say anything else to you?
Well, one of them looked me right in the eye, and he said, "You never can tell." And I asked if I was ever going to see my cat again. I'm sorry. I asked if I'd see my cat again, and he just shrugged, like he didn't even know. And then they left. I still haven't seen my cat. They won't let me. I just want to see my cat. They won't let me.
Before the pandemics, your cat was actually considered a celebrity of sorts. Can you tell us about that?
Most of your older viewers will probably remember, but for the young ones, a little history lesson on my cat. I first adopted him to be a model for this graphic novel that I was doing called The Nightmarish Tales from the Beyond. And I was going to sketch him into the novel, and it was a total failure. But he did get attention, the cat, from the books, and people found him, and they started putting him in Hollywood movies. And, before you know it, he was a star. Really big in Japan, too. He was, really big over there.
Our next interview takes us to a laboratory in Chicago, Illinois, where scientists are studying cats infected with SARS. Hi, Dr. Bell. You're known as a specialist that treats pets infected with SARS. How did you gain that reputation?
Back when the government was investigating the origin of SARS, they brought this cat to me that they wanted to confirm whether or not it was patient ground zero for the SARS-19 pandemic.
And did you confirm it?
We did. For whatever reason, both the cat and the person that was first exposed never actually suffered the fatal effects of SARS, and from what I understand, they have had some ongoing respiratory issues, but nothing like the SARS-29 pandemic when millions of pets perished.
Why do you think so many pets died during the SARS-29 pandemic?
I think they were silent carriers. Whoever designed SARS designed it so children and pets would carry and spread the disease but be asymptomatic. And so as a result, most dogs that were allowed to roam freely and they weren't leashed became carriers in 2020 and then died in 2022.
What will happen to patient zero? That cat was once a worldwide celebrity, but is now under your institute's care.
Well, we certainly keep him here for observation. As you'll see in this video, he hasn't aged a bit in 10 years. In fact, for a cat, he should actually be dead based on his age, but it looks like those who survive SARS enjoy some nice perks.
Such as?
SARS-19 appears to lower one's metabolism and slow the aging process considerably. In fact, those that survived the pandemic may very well find that the aging process has stopped completely. Now, we're still trying to understand this process and how it works, but it appears that the virus interferes with the genes responsible for aging. And that's why so many people in Hollywood that didn't want to grow old injected themselves with SARS-19 back in 2021, hoping it would allow them to stay young.
Did it work?
No, most of them died. You see, we found that you need to have a special genetic predisposition to have any chance of beating SARS. Otherwise, it's just going to lay latent in your spinal fluid, and one day it's going to activate and kill you. Kind of like how HIV turns into AIDS. And that was one of the things that we learned in 2024, that those that were taking antiviral medication for HIV survived up till 2025. When the medication ran out, when the supply chains collapsed those years, all of them eventually succumbed to SARS. So antiviral meds only prevented SARS-29 from activating. They actually never allowed the body to beat it. However, the cats that we're studying here have a genetic predisposition that we hope one day is going to allow us to find a permanent cure for SARS for both people and pets.
Pets weren't the only ones we lost during the pandemics. For many of us, entire families and communities were lost. Our next interview brings us to Port Orange, Florida, to speak with a former high school teacher who experienced firsthand the brutality of the SARS-29 pandemic. Hi, Ms. Proust. Can you please state your name and occupation for the camera?
Hi, I'm Susan, and not really anything these days.
What did you do before the pandemics?
I was a high school teacher. I taught French and Spanish courses.
So you most likely stopped teaching around 2022 then?
Yes. Once the education system was nationalized, as most local governments were broke and couldn't afford to pay teachers anymore, I was laid off. But I wasn't alone, as mostly everyone then was unemployed.
How did you feel about that?
When my family was still alive, I didn't really feel bad about it. Our house was paid off and we didn't have any debt. Most of our savings were used by then, but we didn't have to worry about being evicted or the banks taking our homes like other people did. I felt that it was a challenge, but one that we would get through with time. But then SARS-29 hit and that all changed.
How did it change?
First, my husband, then my children died. Suddenly and without warning. Grieving alone is a terrible thing. Almost as bad as burying the ones you love. And all I had in 2022 was grief. Thankfully, my friends were supportive and would stop by, keep me occupied. We'd garden, talk, and that helped me heal a bit. But then in 2024, my friends began to die, until I was the only one left, except some farmers on the other side of town. I was alone again. That's all I've been since everyone I've loved has died. Alone.